Black single mom on wheelchair shelters, 40 freezing bikers. Next morning, 1,300 Hells Angels stops outside her door. The story you're about to hear will shake you to your core. It's about a single moment of kindness that rippled across an entire nation, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can move mountains. This is the story of Denise Parker, a woman who chose compassion when the world chose fear. Hello, beautiful souls. I hope you're having an amazing day, wherever you're watching from around the world. Drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're tuning in from. I love connecting with all of you. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button because stories like this one deserve to be shared far and wide. The wheelchair's metal frame scraped against the hardwood floor as Denise Parker rolled toward her front door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Outside, the wind howled with the fury of a wounded animal, driving snow against her windows and sheets so thick she couldn't see past her own porch light. Bang, bang, bang. The pounding on her door wasn't polite. It wasn't gentle. It was the desperate hammering of men who knew they were running out of time. Please, a voice cracked through the storm. We just need somewhere warm. Just for tonight. Denise's hands trembled as she gripped the wheels of her chair. Through the peephole, she could see them, 40 men in leather jackets, their faces blue with cold, ice crystals forming in their beards. Bikers, the kind of men her neighbors crossed the street to avoid. The kind of men who made mothers pull their children closer. Her 8-year-old son Tyler was asleep upstairs, trusting her to keep him safe. She had exactly $17 in her wallet, half a loaf of bread, and enough soup to maybe feed 3 people. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to pretend she wasn't home. But as she watched one of the men collapse against her porch railing, his lips moving in what looked like a prayer, Denise Parker made a choice that would echo across the country. She unlocked the door. "Come inside, please." The words left her mouth before her mind could stop them. 40 pairs of desperate eyes stared at her. A black woman in a wheelchair, opening her door to men the world had labeled as dangerous. In that moment, suspended between fear and faith, neither side knew they were about to witness something that would change everything. What happened next would make headlines from coast to coast, but it started with something much simpler. One woman who chose to see human beings instead of stereotypes, even when it could cost her everything. What do you think you would have done in Denise's position? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Denise Parker had learned long ago that life rarely asked if you were ready before it threw its hardest punches. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced down storms that would have broken lesser souls. The car accident 3 years ago had taken away her ability to walk, but it had never touched her ability to stand up for what was right. Her small 2-bedroom house on Maple Street wasn't much to look at, peeling paint on the shutters, a front step that needed fixing, and a heating system that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. But it was home. More importantly, it was the home she'd fought tooth and nail to keep after the medical bills from her accident had nearly buried her family alive. "Mom!" Tyler's sleepy voice drifted down from the top of the stairs. At 8 years old, he had his father's warm brown eyes and his mother's stubborn streak. "What's all that noise?" "Just some people who need help, baby," Denise called back, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding in her living room. "Go back to sleep." The bikers filed in like ghosts materializing from the storm, their leather jackets dripping melted snow onto her worn carpet. They moved with surprising gentleness, as if afraid their very presence might shatter something precious. The first man through the door was built like a mountain, 6'4" with arms covered in tattoos that told stories Denise could only imagine. But when he looked at her, his eyes held the same exhaustion she recognized in her own mirror every morning. "Ma'am, I'm Jake Torino," he said, pulling off a knit cap to reveal graying hair. "We've been riding for 6 hours, trying to find somewhere that would take us in. Every place we stopped." He trailed off, but Denise could fill in the blanks. She'd seen how people looked at men like these. "You're human beings caught in a storm," she said simply, maneuvering her wheelchair to make room as more men crowded through her doorway. "That's all I need to know." Behind Jake came a younger man with kind eyes and nervous energy. Danny Corleone, barely 25, who kept apologizing for the puddles their boots were making. Then there was Rico Wick, a quiet giant who immediately started helping the older bikers out of their frozen jackets. Each man carried his own story, his own reasons for being on the road, but tonight they were united by something simpler, the basic human need for warmth and shelter. What struck Denise most wasn't their appearance or their reputation. It was how carefully they moved through her space, how they whispered to avoid waking Tyler, how Jake immediately asked if there was anything they could do to help. These weren't the monsters the world painted them as. They were sons, fathers, brothers. They were human. "We don't have much," Denise admitted, rolling toward her tiny kitchen. "But I can make some coffee, and there's soup." "Ma'am," Jake interrupted gently. "You've already given us more than anyone else would. We're not here to take your food. We just needed to get out of that storm before." He didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Before someone died. As the men settled into whatever space they could find, some on her couch, others on the floor, a few standing against the walls, Denise realized she wasn't afraid. She should have been. A single mother, disabled, alone with 40 strangers. But something in their careful movements, their quiet gratitude, told her she'd made the right choice. What she didn't know was that upstairs, Tyler had crept to his bedroom window and was watching the street with wide eyes. What she couldn't see was the way word was already spreading through the biker community, not just about the storm, but about the woman who had opened her door when no one else would. And what none of them could have predicted was that by morning, Denise Parker's small act of kindness would set in motion events that would shake their small town to its very foundation. Have you ever had to choose between safety and doing what's right? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire someone else to be brave. The coffee was barely finished brewing when Jake Torino's phone buzzed with a message that made his weathered face go pale. He stepped away from the group, reading the text twice before his shoulders sagged with a weight that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "What is it?" Danny Corleone whispered, noticing the change in his road captain's demeanor. Jake's voice was barely audible. "It's Little Bear. He didn't make it." The words hit the room like a physical blow. 40 grown men, hardened by years on the road, fell silent. Little Bear, Tommy Eastwood to his mother, was only 19. He'd been riding with a smaller group that got separated in the storm, trying to reach the same shelter these men had found. But Tommy's group hadn't found Denise Parker. They'd found locked doors, turned backs, and cold shoulders until it was too late. Denise watched the transformation ripple through her living room. These men who had been grateful in gentle moments before now carried something heavier. Grief mixed with a rage that made the air itself feel dangerous. She could see them remembering every door that had been slammed in their faces tonight, every person who had looked at their leather jackets and decided they weren't worth saving. "Where?" Rico Wick's voice was granite. "County Hospital. Hypothermia. Took him an hour ago." Jake's hands clenched into fists. Kid was 3 miles from here when he collapsed. The silence that followed was deafening. Denise could feel the weight of 40 men processing the fact that a boy had died in the cold while they sat warm in her living room. The guilt was eating them alive, and she could see some of them starting to stand, ready to walk back into the storm rather than accept comfort their friend would never feel again. "Stop!" Denise's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Every eye in the room turned to her. "Don't you dare feel guilty for being alive. Don't you dare dishonor that boy's memory by throwing away the gift you've been given." Jake's eyes flashed with something between anger and anguish. "Lady, you don't understand. We left him behind. You survived," Denise interrupted, rolling her wheelchair closer to the center of the room. "And now you get to make sure his death means something. You get to make sure no one else dies alone in the cold because people are too afraid to see past a leather jacket." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. These men had spent their lives being judged, being turned away, being treated like threats instead of human beings. But here was a woman who had looked past all of that, who had seen them for what they really were. Danny pulled out his own phone, his fingers flying over the screen. "I'm texting the other chapters. They need to know about Little Bear. They need to know about." He gestured around the room, struggling to find words for what was happening. "About what?" Denise asked. "About you," Jake said quietly. "About what you did tonight. About the fact that when everyone else saw monsters, you saw men who needed help." As Danny's message spread through the biker network, something unprecedented began to happen. Chapters from 3 states started responding. Not with anger or calls for revenge, but with something else entirely. They wanted to know about the woman who had opened her door. They wanted to know about Denise Parker. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved 40 lives tonight. But more than that, you reminded us that there are still good people in this world. People who judge by character instead of appearance." Denise felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You would have done the same for me, would we?" Rico asked quietly. "When's the last time any of us stopped to help someone who looked different from us? When's the last time we saw past our own assumptions?" The question hit the room like a revelation. These men, who had spent years being judged and rejected, realized they had been just as guilty of building walls. But tonight, in this small living room, those walls were crumbling. What none of them knew was that Danny's message was spreading faster than wildfire through the biker community. Chapters in neighboring states were reading about Denise Parker and making a decision that would change everything. They were coming, not for revenge, not for confrontation, but for something much more powerful. They were coming to say thank you. Sometimes the most powerful moments come from the most unexpected places. Have you ever been surprised by someone's kindness? Let me know in the comments below. By 3 a.m., Denise's phone had started ringing. The first call came from a local news station. Somehow word had leaked about the bikers taking shelter in her home. The reporter's voice was sharp with barely concealed excitement, the kind that came from smelling a story that could go viral. "Ms. Parker, is it true you're harboring 40 motorcycle gang members in your home? Are you concerned for your safety? What about your son?" Denise hung up without answering, but the calls kept coming. Local news, then regional outlets, then someone claiming to be from a national network. Each caller seemed more interested in sensationalizing the story than understanding it. They wanted drama, conflict, danger, not the quiet truth of human beings helping human beings. "They're making it sound like we're holding you hostage," Jake said grimly, watching Denise decline another call. His weathered face was tight with concern. "This is exactly what we were trying to avoid." Through her front window, Denise could see the first news van pulling up across the street, its satellite dish gleaming under the streetlights. Then another. By dawn, there would be a circus on her front lawn, and she knew exactly how the story would be spun. Disabled woman terrorized by biker gang, or single mother's home invaded by outlaws. "Maybe we should go," Danny suggested, his young face creased with worry. "We never wanted to bring trouble to your door." "You're not trouble," Denise said firmly, but she could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. These men had spent their lives being painted as villains, and now they were watching it happen again, this time to someone who had shown them kindness. That's when Tyler appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mom, why are there so many cars outside?" The room fell silent as 40 pairs of eyes turned toward the 8-year-old boy. Denise felt her heart clench, knowing that every man in her living room was thinking the same thing. They had brought danger to a child's home. But Tyler surprised them all. Instead of fear, his face lit up with curiosity as he took in the scene below. Men in leather jackets sitting quietly in his living room, some reading books from his mother's shelves, others playing cards with a deck Rico had produced from his pocket. "Are you the motorcycle guys?" Tyler asked, patting down the stairs in his pajamas. "I saw your bikes outside. They're really cool." Jake knelt down at Tyler's eye level, his massive frame somehow making itself smaller and less threatening. "Yeah, buddy, we are. Your mom let us stay here because it was really cold outside." "That's good," Tyler said matter-of-factly. "Mom always says we should help people when they need it, even if they look different from us." The simple wisdom of a child hit the room like a thunderbolt. Here was an 8-year-old boy who saw exactly what his mother saw. Not bikers or outlaws or gang members, but people who needed help. "Your mom's pretty special," Danny said softly. "I know," Tyler grinned. "She's the strongest person in the world. She can do anything, even in her wheelchair." As if summoned by Tyler's words, Denise's phone buzzed with a text message that made her blood run cold. It was from her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. "Denise, I'm worried about you. I called the police. They're on their way. We need to go," Jake said immediately, reading the panic in Denise's eyes. "Now." But before anyone could move, the sound of sirens filled the air. Red and blue lights painted the walls of Denise's living room as 3 police cars pulled up outside. The news vans immediately perked up like vultures sensing fresh meat. Nobody moves, Denise said firmly, rolling her wheelchair toward the front door. This is my house, and you're my guests. Let me handle this. Through the window, she could see Officer Martinez stepping out of the lead car. She'd known him since high school. He was a good man, but he was also a cop responding to a call about a potential hostage situation. Denise, Martinez called through a megaphone. We need you to come outside so we can make sure you're safe. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The safest Denise had felt in months was right now, surrounded by 40 men who would die before letting harm come to her or her son. But to the outside world, she was a victim in need of rescue. What do we do? Rico whispered. Denise looked around her living room, at Tyler chatting quietly with Danny about motorcycles, at Jake organizing the men to clean up any mess they'd made, at 40 human beings who had found sanctuary in her home and were now facing the possibility of arrest simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. We tell the truth, she said finally, and we hope the world is ready to hear it. But as more police cars arrived and the news crews set up their cameras, Denise realized that the truth might not be enough. The narrative was already being written, and it didn't include the quiet dignity of men sharing their last cigarettes or the gentle way they'd helped her reach something from a high shelf. What she didn't know was that 300 miles away, something unprecedented was happening. Biker chapters from across the region were mobilizing, not for war, but for something much more powerful. They were coming to stand with the woman who had stood with them. Have you ever been misunderstood because of how you look or who you associate with? Share your experience in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful stories come from the most unexpected places. Officer Martinez approached the front door with his hand resting on his weapon, but his eyes told a different story. Through the window, he could see into Denise's living room, and what he saw didn't match the emergency call he'd received. Instead of chaos, he witnessed something extraordinary. 40 bikers sat quietly, some reading Tyler's picture books to him, others carefully folding blankets they'd used. One man was gently helping Denise reach a coffee mug from a high cabinet. Another was showing Tyler how to tie a proper knot with a piece of rope. Denise, Martinez called, his voice softer now, confused. Can you come to the door? We just need to make sure everything's okay. When Denise opened the door, Tyler by her side, and Jake standing respectfully behind her, Martinez's training warred with what his eyes were telling him. The little boy was grinning ear to ear, completely unafraid. Denise looked tired but not distressed. And the bikers. They looked like men who'd found something precious and were afraid of losing it. Everything's fine, Carlos, Denise said, using Martinez's first name deliberately. These men needed shelter from the storm. I gave it to them. Ma'am, we received reports of a possible hostage situation. The only thing being held hostage here is people's assumptions. Jake interrupted quietly. Your friend saved our lives tonight. We're not about to repay that kindness with harm. Martinez studied Jake's face, looking for deception and finding none. Behind him, his backup officers were getting restless, and the news crews were setting up for what they hoped would be dramatic footage of arrests and confrontation. That's when Tyler stepped forward, his 8-year-old voice cutting through the tension like a bell. Officer Martinez, did you know that Mr. Jake used to be a teacher? And Mr. Danny builds houses for people who don't have them? And Mr. Rico has 3 daughters, and he showed me pictures, and they're really pretty and smart and... Tyler, Denise said gently, but Martinez held up a hand. Let him talk. And they told me about their friend Tommy who died in the cold tonight because nobody would help him, and it made them really sad, but Mom helped them, and now they're not going to die too. And isn't that good? The simple truth from a child's mouth hit Martinez like a physical blow. He looked past Tyler to the men in the living room, seeing them with new eyes. These weren't the dangerous criminals he'd been expecting. They were grieving friends who'd found an angel in the most unlikely place. Carlos, Denise said quietly, what would you have done if 40 people were freezing to death on your doorstep? Before Martinez could answer, his radio crackled to life. Unit 12, we've got reports of a massive motorcycle convoy heading into town. ETA 15 minutes. Requesting all available units. The blood drained from Jake's face. How many bikes? Martinez pressed his radio. Dispatch, can you give me numbers on that convoy? Preliminary reports suggest over 1,000 motorcycles, possibly more. They're coming from multiple directions. The news crews outside erupted into excited chatter. This was the story they'd been waiting for. A massive biker rally descending on a small town. The narrative practically wrote itself. Gang warfare, territorial disputes, violence in the streets. But Jake's reaction wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of satisfaction or anticipation, his face showed pure terror. "They're not coming for a fight," he whispered, pulling out his phone to check the flood of messages. "They're coming for her." "What do you mean?" Martinez demanded. Danny looked up from his own phone, his young face pale with awe. The story spread through every chapter in 5 states. About what Mrs. Parker did. About Little Bear. He gestured helplessly around the room. About the woman who saw us as human beings. Rico finished quietly. Jake's phone rang, and he answered it with shaking hands. "Road Captain Torino." The voice on the other end was gravelly, authoritative. "Jake, this is Diesel McKenzie, National President. We're 10 minutes out with 1,300 riders. We're not coming for trouble. We're coming to pay our respects to the lady who reminded us what honor looks like." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 1,300 bikers weren't coming for revenge or confrontation. They were coming to say thank you to a woman in a wheelchair who had opened her door when no one else would. "Ma'am," Jake said, turning to Denise with something approaching reverence in his voice, "you need to understand what's about to happen. In the biker world, what you did tonight, it's going to become a legend. Those men coming here, they're not just from one club. They're from dozens of chapters, different clubs that don't always get along. But they're united in one thing, respect for what you did." Martinez looked between Denise and Jake, trying to process what he was hearing. "Are you telling me that over 1,000 bikers are converging on this neighborhood just to thank one woman?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Jake said. "An officer, you need to understand, this isn't about intimidation or show of force. This is about honor, about recognizing someone who embodies everything we claim to stand for, but sometimes forget in practice." Through the window, they could already hear it, the distant rumble of hundreds of engines, growing closer by the minute. The sound was like thunder rolling across the earth, and it was heading straight for Maple Street. Denise looked at Tyler, who was practically vibrating with excitement, then at the 40 men in her living room who had become something more than guests. They had become family. Finally, she looked at Martinez, whose hand had moved away from his weapon entirely. "Carlos," she said quietly, "I think we're about to find out what happens when the world decides to pay attention to kindness instead of fear. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest waves. Have you ever witnessed something that restored your faith in humanity? Drop a comment and let me know. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today." The rumble of 1,300 motorcycles grew louder, and with it came something Denise hadn't anticipated: fear. Not from the bikers in her living room, but from her neighbors, from the police, from the news crews who were now broadcasting live to millions of viewers with headlines that made her stomach turn. "Biker army descends on small town," and "disabled woman at center of motorcycle gang standoff." Martinez's radio exploded with chatter. "All units, we have reports of armed bikers. Repeat, armed bikers approaching residential areas. Request immediate backup from state police." "Armed?" Jake's voice was sharp with alarm. "We don't carry weapons to events like this. This is about respect, not—" "It doesn't matter what it's really about," Martinez said grimly, watching more police cars arrive. "What matters is what people think it's about." Through her front window, Denise could see her neighbors emerging from their houses, not to welcome the approaching convoy, but to evacuate. Mrs. Henderson was loading her car with suitcases, shooting terrified glances toward Denise's house. The Johnsons were herding their children into their minivan. Within minutes, Maple Street was becoming a ghost town. "Mom," Tyler whispered, pressing close to her wheelchair. For the first time since the bikers had arrived, he looked scared. "Why is everyone leaving?" Before Denise could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID made her heart sink. Child Protective Services. "Ms. Parker, this is Janet Morrison from CPS. We've received multiple reports about your current living situation. We need to discuss the welfare of your son immediately." The words hit Denise like a physical blow. "My son is perfectly safe. These men have done nothing but—" "Ma'am, we have reports of over 40 gang members in your home, with more on the way. We're going to need you to bring Tyler to our offices immediately for his own protection." "No." The word came out stronger than Denise felt. "Tyler is staying with me. Ms. Parker, if you don't comply voluntarily, we'll be forced to involve law enforcement. A judge has already signed an emergency custody order. The phone went dead, and Denise stared at it in horror. Around her, 40 men who had been laughing and sharing stories just hours before now looked like they were attending a funeral, their own. "This is our fault," Danny said, his young voice breaking. "We brought this down on you." "We should have never come here," Rico added, his massive frame somehow looking smaller. "We should have known this would happen." Jake was already moving toward the door. "We're leaving. Right now. Before they take your boy." "Stop." Denise's voice cut through their self-recrimination like a blade. "Don't you dare blame yourselves for other people's fear and ignorance." But even as she spoke, she could see the doubt in their eyes. These men had spent their lives being blamed for things they didn't do, being judged for how they looked rather than who they were. And now their presence was threatening to tear apart the life of the one person who had seen past their leather jackets to their hearts. The sound of the approaching motorcycles was deafening now, and Martinez was shouting into his radio, trying to coordinate a response to what everyone assumed would be a violent confrontation. News helicopters circled overhead like vultures, broadcasting live footage of what they were calling a siege in suburbia. "Denise," a voice called through a megaphone from outside. "This is Captain Williams with the state police. We need you and your son to exit the building immediately for your own safety." Tyler began to cry, not from fear of the bikers who had been nothing but kind to him, but from the chaos swirling around his home, the helicopters overhead, the flashing lights, the shouting voices that made it sound like his mother had done something terrible. "I don't understand," he sobbed into Denise's lap. "Why is everyone so mad? The motorcycle men are nice. They didn't hurt anybody." Denise held her son close, feeling the weight of 40 pairs of eyes watching her, knowing that each of these men would walk back into the storm right now if it would protect her family. But she also knew it was too late for that. The story had taken on a life of its own, and the truth had become irrelevant. Jake knelt beside her wheelchair, his weathered face etched with pain. "Ma'am, I need you to know something. What you did tonight, opening your door, treating us like human beings, it's going to change things. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it's going to change how people see us, how we see ourselves. But it's also going to cost you everything, isn't it?" Denise whispered, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. Her neighbors were gone. CPS was coming for Tyler. The police saw her as either a victim or an accomplice. And 1,300 bikers were about to arrive, turning her quiet street into a battleground. "We won't let that happen," Danny said fiercely. "We'll figure something out." "You'll what?" Denise asked, her voice hollow. "Fight the police. Fight CPS. Fight the whole world. That's not who you are. That's not who any of us are." Outside, the rumble of engines was so loud now that the windows were shaking. The first motorcycles were turning onto Maple Street, and Denise could see the lead riders, men and women in leather, their faces grim with purpose. Behind them stretched a line of bikes that seemed to go on forever. In that moment, surrounded by chaos and facing the loss of everything she held dear, Denise Parker realized that sometimes doing the right thing came with a price that seemed too high to pay. But as she looked at Tyler's tear-stained face, and then at the 40 men who had become family in the span of a single night, she knew she would make the same choice again, even if it cost her everything. Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and protecting what you love? Sometimes the hardest decisions reveal who we really are. Share your thoughts in the comments below. The first motorcycle to turn onto Maple Street wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of a massive Harley ridden by a leather-clad giant, it was a modest touring bike carrying a woman in her 60s, her gray hair braided down her back, wearing a jacket that read "Nurses on Bikes" across the shoulders. Behind her came another surprise, a group of riders in military dress uniforms, their bikes flying American flags. Then teachers, firefighters, construction workers, and yes, traditional bikers too, but mixed in with people from every walk of life imaginable. Jake stared out the window in amazement. That's not just bikers out there. That's everyone. Martinez lowered his radio, equally stunned. "Dispatch, I need clarification on these riders. They're not matching our intelligence reports." The lead rider, the gray-haired nurse, pulled up to Denise's house and removed her helmet. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades saving lives. "I'm Margaret Ripley, she called out, addressing Martinez directly. Retired Army nurse, 30 years of service. I rode 4 hours through that storm because I heard about a woman who opened her door to people in need. That's not a crime, officer. That's heroism. Behind her, more riders were dismounting. A man in a firefighter's jacket approached Martinez with his hands visible and non-threatening. Captain Rodriguez, Chicago Fire Department. We came to thank Mrs. Parker for reminding us what service really means. One by one, they introduced themselves. Teachers who rode on weekends. Veterans who found peace on 2 wheels. Nurses who formed riding clubs to raise money for charity. Construction workers, accountants, even a few off-duty police officers from neighboring counties. This isn't a gang rally, Martinez realized, speaking into his radio. Dispatch, cancel the emergency response. These are just people. Inside the house, Tyler had stopped crying and was pressed against the window, watching in wonder as hundreds of ordinary people on motorcycles filled his street. Mom, look, there's a lady with a bike just like yours. He pointed to a woman unloading a wheelchair from a specially modified motorcycle. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from the lead rider. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to honor Mrs. Parker. Can we speak with her? Denise looked around her living room at the 40 men who had started this incredible chain of events. They were no longer the desperate, frozen strangers who had knocked on her door. They were family now, bound together by something deeper than blood. Tyler, she said softly, would you like to meet some new friends? When Denise rolled on her front porch with Tyler by her side, and Jake standing protectively behind her, the crowd of riders fell silent. 1,300 people, engines off, helmets removed, looking at a woman in a wheelchair who had reminded them all of something they'd forgotten. Margaret Ripley stepped forward, her weathered face kind but serious. Mrs. Parker, my name is Margaret. I've been riding for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened here tonight. When word spread about what you did, opening your door to people in need when everyone else turned them away, it touched something in all of us. We're not all bikers, called out a man in a teacher's jacket. But we all heard about your kindness, and we wanted to be part of something good for once. A woman with a firefighter's patch stepped forward. Mrs. Parker, we heard that people are trying to paint this as something dangerous, something wrong. We came to stand with you and show the world what this really is, people helping people. Tyler tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mom, are all these people here because you helped the motorcycle men? Yes, baby, Denise whispered, tears streaming down her face. They're here because sometimes when you do something good, it spreads. Captain Williams, the state police commander, approached with his weapon holstered and his hands open. Mrs. Parker, I owe you an apology. We came here expecting trouble, but what we found is, well, it's something else entirely. Jake stepped forward, his voice carrying across the crowd. Mrs. Parker didn't just save 40 lives tonight. She reminded us all what it means to see people instead of stereotypes, to choose compassion over fear. The crowd erupted in applause, not the wild cheering of a rally, but the respectful appreciation of people who recognized something sacred when they saw it. Margaret Ripley pulled out her phone and began recording. My name is Margaret Ripley, and I'm standing in front of the home of Denise Parker, a woman who proved tonight that heroism doesn't require superpowers, just an open heart and the courage to act on it. Within minutes, her video was being shared across social media, but this time the narrative was different. This wasn't about dangerous bikers or gang activity. This was about a community coming together to honor someone who had embodied the best of human nature. Martinez approached Denise with his radio in hand. Mrs. Parker, I just spoke with CPS. Given the unusual circumstances and the clear evidence that your son is safe and loved, they're withdrawing their emergency order. Tyler looked up at his mother with shining eyes. Does this mean the motorcycle people can stay for breakfast? Denise laughed through her tears, looking out at 1,300 people who had traveled through a storm not for violence or confrontation, but to say thank you to a woman who had reminded them all what kindness looked like. I think, she said, we're going to need a lot more pancakes. Sometimes the darkest moments are just before the most beautiful dawn. Have you ever witnessed a community come together for something good? Share your story in the comments. Let's celebrate the power of human kindness together. What happened next will be talked about for generations. As word spread through social media about the true nature of the gathering on Maple Street, Something unprecedented began to unfold. Local businesses that had been closed and shuttered against the biker invasion began to reopen. The diner that had turned away Jake's group earlier that night sent over coffee and sandwiches with a handwritten apology. The motel owner who had refused them rooms arrived with blankets and pillows, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong," he said simply to Jake. "I was so wrong." But the real magic happened when Tyler, with the fearless curiosity of an 8-year-old, walked into the crowd of 1,300 riders and began asking questions. "What's your bike's name? How fast does it go? Do you have kids? What's your favorite color?" Within minutes, this little boy had transformed a potentially tense standoff into something that looked more like the world's largest family reunion. Tough-looking bikers were showing him pictures of their grandchildren. Veterans were teaching him about honor and service. The nurse, Margaret, was explaining how she used her motorcycle to deliver medical supplies to remote areas. "You know what I think?" Tyler announced to the crowd, his young voice somehow carrying across the entire gathering. "I think all of you are just like my mom. You help people." The silence that followed was profound. 1,300 adults, many of whom had spent years being misunderstood or judged, heard themselves described by a child as helpers. It was a moment of recognition that cut through decades of stereotypes and assumptions. That's when Diesel McKenzie, the national president who had organized this unprecedented gathering, stepped forward. He was a mountain of a man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. But when he looked at Denise, his expression was one of pure reverence. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his gravelly voice carrying across the crowd, 40 years ago, I was a scared kid on the streets. The only family I found was in this brotherhood. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that being a family means taking care of everyone, not just our own." He gestured to the crowd around him. "What you did tonight, opening your door without question, seeing us as human beings instead of threats, that's what we're supposed to be about. That's what we lost sight of." Diesel reached in his jacket and pulled out something that made several of the older bikers gasp. It was a patch, not just any patch, but the highest honor their community could bestow. "Mrs. Parker, I'd like to present you with something that's never been given to someone outside our brotherhood. This is the Guardian Angel patch. It's for someone who embodies everything we aspire to be." "I can't accept that," Denise said softly. "I'm not a biker. I just did what anyone should do." "That's exactly why you deserve it," Margaret Ripley said, stepping forward. "You didn't help those men because they were bikers or because you expected something in return. You helped them because they were human beings in need. That's what a guardian angel does." Jake knelt beside Denise's wheelchair, his weathered face wet with tears. "Ma'am, you saved more than 40 lives tonight. You saved our souls. You reminded us who we're supposed to be." The crowd began to chant, softly at first, then growing stronger. "Guardian angel, guardian angel." But Denise held up her hand, and 1,300 people fell silent. "If I accept this honor," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd, "I accept it on one condition. That all of you remember this moment. Remember that the person who needs help might not look like you. They might not dress like you, or live like you, or believe what you believe. But they're still human beings, and they still deserve kindness." She looked around the faces surrounding her, bikers and nurses, teachers and firefighters, veterans and construction workers, all united by something bigger than their differences. "Promise me," she continued, "that when you leave here tonight, you'll look for chances to be someone else's guardian angel. Promise me that you'll choose compassion over fear, understanding over judgment." The response was thunderous. 1,300 voices promising to carry forward the lesson they'd learned on Maple Street. But more than that, they were promising to become the change they wanted to see in the world. As the formal ceremony concluded and people began to share food and stories, something beautiful happened. The neighbors who had fled earlier began to return, drawn by curiosity and the obvious lack of violence. Mrs. Henderson approached Denise hesitantly. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I was scared, and I let that fear make me do something I'm ashamed of. Can you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive," Denise replied, taking her neighbor's hand. "Fear makes us all do things we regret sometimes. What matters is what we do next." By sunrise, Maple Street had become something unprecedented, a place where 1,300 strangers had become family, where assumptions had been shattered, and where a single act of kindness had rippled outward to touch thousands of lives. The news crews, who had come expecting violence and confrontation, found themselves documenting something entirely different: the birth of a movement based on compassion and understanding. As the riders began to prepare for their journeys home, each one stopped to thank Denise personally. Many left contact information, promising to stay in touch. Others made donations to help with Tyler's education or Denise's medical expenses. But the most precious gift was the knowledge that 40 men who had been strangers 12 hours ago were now family forever. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions start with the simplest acts of kindness. Have you ever been part of something that changed your perspective on people? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire someone else to choose compassion over fear. 6 months later, Denise Parker sat in her wheelchair on the front porch of her newly renovated home, watching Tyler play in the yard that had been transformed by volunteers from across the country. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by fresh siding donated by a construction company in Ohio. The broken front step had been rebuilt into a beautiful ramp by firefighters from 3 different states. Her heating system no longer wheezed. It had been replaced entirely by a group of veterans who called themselves Bikers for Better Living. But the most beautiful change wasn't to her house. It was to her community. Mrs. Henderson waved from across the street, where she was tending to a garden she'd planted in memory of Tommy Little Bear Eastwood. The motel owner had established a fund to provide free emergency shelter for travelers caught in storms. The diner now displayed a sign that read, "All are welcome here," in 12 different languages. "Mom, they're here," Tyler called out, pointing down the street where a familiar rumble was growing louder. Every month, like clockwork, Jake, Danny, and Rico returned to Maple Street. Not for dramatic reunions or media attention, but for something much simpler: Sunday dinner with family. They'd been joined over the months by Margaret Ripley, who had become Tyler's honorary grandmother, and Captain Rodriguez, who taught Tyler about fire safety and courage. "How's my favorite guardian angel?" Jake asked, climbing the porch steps with a grocery bag full of ingredients for his famous chili. "Tired but happy," Denise replied, accepting his gentle hug. "The foundation has been keeping me busy." The Denise Parker Foundation for Community Understanding had grown from a simple idea into a nationwide movement. What started as a way to honor Tommy Eastwood's memory had become something much larger: a network of people committed to breaking down barriers between communities that had been separated by fear and misunderstanding. "Any word from the documentary crew?" Danny asked, settling into the chair that had become his regular spot. "They finished editing last week," Denise said. "The premiere is next month. Can you believe it? A major network documentary about one night that changed everything." But even as she spoke about the documentary, the book deals, and the speaking engagements, Denise knew that the real victory wasn't in the attention or accolades. It was in the small, daily changes she witnessed in her community and beyond. Tyler bounded up the porch steps, his face glowing with excitement. "Mr. Jake, guess what? I got an A on my essay about heroes." "What did you write about, buddy?" Jake asked, ruffling Tyler's hair. "I wrote about how real heroes aren't the people in movies with superpowers. Real heroes are people like my mom who choose to help others, even when it's scary or hard." Rico, who had been quietly setting up the chessboard he and Tyler played every visit, looked up with moisture in his eyes. Kids have wisdom beyond his years. He learned it from the best teacher, Margaret said, arriving with her weekly contribution of homemade cookies. His mother. As the afternoon wore on and the familiar rhythm of their chosen family settled around them, Denise reflected on how much had changed since that cold night 6 months ago. The 40 men who had knocked on her door had scattered back to their lives across the country, but they stayed connected through a group chat that buzzed constantly with updates, encouragement, and love. Some had gone back to school. Others had started businesses or volunteer organizations. Danny had begun working with at-risk youth, sharing his story of how one woman's kindness had changed his perspective on everything. Rico had opened a motorcycle repair shop that doubled as a community center, offering free services to anyone who needed help. But perhaps the most profound change was in how they all saw themselves and others. The guardian angel patch that Denise wore on a special jacket had become a symbol recognized across the country. Not a biker culture, but of the commitment to see past appearances and choose compassion. "You know what I realized today?" Tyler said, looking up from his chess game with Rico. That night, when all the motorcycle people came here, it wasn't really about motorcycles at all. What was it about, sweetheart? Denise asked. It was about family, Tyler said simply. About how family isn't just people who look like you or live like you. Family is people who care about each other and help each other and choose to love each other even when it's hard. The adults around him fell silent, struck by the profound truth in a child's words. Jake cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. Tyler, you just summed up everything we've been trying to figure out for months. As the sun began to set over Maple Street, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Denise looked around at the faces of the people who had become her chosen family. She thought about Tommy Eastwood, whose death had been the catalyst for something beautiful. She thought about the 1,300 riders who had traveled through a storm to say thank you. She thought about the neighbors who had learned to see past their fears and the community that had been transformed by a single act of kindness. What are you thinking about, Mom? Tyler asked, noticing her contemplative expression. I'm thinking about how one small choice can change everything, Denise said. How opening a door, literally or figuratively, can let in more light than you ever imagined possible. Margaret raised her coffee cup in a toast to Denise Parker, who reminded us all that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing love even when you're afraid. To guardian angels, Jake added, who come in all shapes and sizes and remind us what it means to be human. To family, Rico said quietly, the kind you choose and the kind that chooses you back. As they clinked their cups together on the porch of the little house on Maple Street, Denise Parker knew that she had found something more precious than any award or recognition. She had found proof that kindness was contagious, that love could overcome fear, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward to change the world. The rumble of motorcycles had long since faded, but the echo of that night would continue forever, in the lives that had been changed, the barriers that had been broken, and the reminder that every single day, each person has the choice to be someone else's guardian angel. All it takes is the courage to open the door. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of love, courage, and the power of human kindness. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that there are still guardian angels in this world. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the very best of humanity. Until next time, keep choosing compassion, keep opening doors, and keep believing in the power of love to change everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and let me know how this story made you feel. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Remember, we're all in this together, and every act of kindness matters.